We had the pleasure of hosting Sean in 2015, 18th February, and we were lucky to get him here for a full day workshop that was on a kind of a keynote for the whole day on the topic like developing aligned, engaged, and innovative organizations. And that went very successful. And unfortunately, later on, we couldn't get him back again to Pakistan because he was also very busy and we got stuck in some other conferences here in Pakistan. We wanted to have him here this year, but then this COVID thing happened. Now we thought that we'll have him on the webinar. So Sean has recently, last year, written a book, Transition Point, From Steam to Singularity. And this book is available at Amazon also. One can have a look there. I even got an audio copy of that book. About Sean, he's a multi-award winning keynote speaker. He's the author of, as I said, Transition Point, From Steam to Singularity. And the book interestingly examines the causes of tech progress and how the current wave of change will disrupt our business models. Sean has 25 years of experience in supply chain transformation, including 10 years as the design authority on a $600 million global SAP implementation program. Impressive, I must say. He is a visiting fellow at the Cranfield University and a fellow at Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. He is a transformation advisor for the Association of Supply Chain Management. And he, during his discourse, will emphasize more on a rise, as he says, he uses the word PAL, P-A-L, rise of PAL in supply chain, which is personal, automated, and local. And also he'll talk about how COVID will accelerate the spread and impact of disruption. But before I hand over to Sean, I think while writing this book last year, Sean, probably you had a premonition of what's going to come about. And that's actually happened.
Yes.
So you would like to dwell on that also. So yes. Over to Sean.
Thank you very much.
Over to Sean.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak for the Management Association of Pakistan today and to see you again, Salah. It was a wonderful time back in 2015 when I was over in Karachi, and it's wonderful to be able to speak to a Pakistani audience once again. I'm going to just share my screen. I can just figure out how to do that. There we go. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, you should be able to see in a big green circle.
Yes.
Welcome. Yes, jolly good. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go through this presentation, then we'll pick up on Q&A at the end, any questions that people might have that I don't cover here. So this term gets thrown around a lot, and it has been since about 2008 when the financial crash happened, which is VUCA, which is a military term that stands for volatile, uncertain, and complex and ambiguous. And organizations like Gartner have been using this term for a number of years now to say, it's a VUCA world and we need to have VUCA leadership. And it's become more VUCA in 2020, I think, than it was previously, because it's certainly more volatile, it's definitely more uncertain. Supply chains are getting extremely more complex and it's incredibly ambiguous. But the one thing that really challenged me was that everyone was talking about it being a VUCA world, but no one was asking the question, why? Why is it so disruptive right now? Why are we going through such an exponential period of change? And this is what fascinated me. And it fascinated me so much that I said to my wife that I was going to take 3 months off work. This is back in 2013, and I was going to write a book all about this. As it happened, it took 6 years to write this book, because the further I dug, the more I realized that actually society and economies and technology and business are all intrinsically linked. And I couldn't see any other book that sort of understood the way these connect together and the implications that they're having on society. So in order to be able to write this, I had to go back into history in order to understand why things are changing in the way they are, why progress happens in waves. I had to understand what's happening right now in terms of the technological revolution we're going through, and I'm going to talk about that over the next hour. But also the really important question was the so what question. What does this mean? What does it mean for businesses? What does it mean for our economies? What does it mean for society? And where is it taking us as a species? And I sort of brought all of those elements together into this single book called Transition Point. Now, in understanding the very nature of change, you need to understand that actually, ever since the Industrial Revolution, our change has been cyclical, not linear. It actually happens in waves, and these waves build on each other. And each one of these waves are about 50 years in length, 50 to 60 years in length. And 2/3 of the wave is made up with the upswing. And the upswing period is what we're going through right now. These are incredibly disruptive periods that are basically where all the experimentation and entrepreneurship takes place. So we have this process that a Austrian economist called Joseph Schumpeter called creative disruption. So in the upswing, we have the creation of whole new businesses, whole new industries, whole new technologies that ultimately destroy the old ones. And then as they become adopted and diffused upon the marketplace, then the market moves to more, efficiency-based operations and exploitation of existing technologies. So if you imagine in the 1990s all the way up to about 2008, change was relatively linear. People were planning for the next year based on what happened the previous year and adding a few percentage on it. Now we're in the upswing. We quite simply can't, estimate what we're going to be doing next year. We don't know what's going to happen next month. So the rate of change has become exponential. And most leaders don't know how to handle this. They've been trained in the downswing, not the upswing. And if we go back to before 2008, you can see that there's been 5 waves of creative destruction. And the 5th wave collapsed around 2008. But as you can see, each wave brought its own power source. It had a different transport mechanism and a different communication mechanism, and brought together these techno-economic paradigm shifts, created whole new industries. So the first industrial revolution created coal mining, cotton and pottery industries. Then we moved to steam-powered factories and iron bridges, and all the way through into the last wave where we had the computer revolution and things like smartphones and e-commerce started to appear towards the end of it. One of the things that we've identified is that through these waves, each one's getting a little bit more frequent. So the time period between technological waves is shortening. The impact of each wave is increasing. So the amount of innovation in each wave is actually increasing as more and more people are involved in it. The rate of diffusion and the speed at which it spreads across society and national boundaries is speeding up. And the scope of the impact is increasing dramatically. So if you imagine the first industrial revolution was pretty much limited to Britain, then it moved to the West and the Germany and Japan and the US. And now, of course, we're talking about the entire globe. So I do a lot of work in Africa. If I go speak to people in Nigeria, for example, they will have almost exactly the same technology in front of them that I have. So these things diffuse incredibly quickly. Digital products diffuse incredibly quickly, whereas previously things used to travel by sailboat. And we're now in the transition period between the 5th and the 6th wave. And in fact, we've left the 5th wave behind now. And we're now in the period that is the most disruptive of all, which is called the upswing. Because what's happening now is all of these new innovations are starting to hit the marketplace, and there's a power shift taking place. So the nature of creative destruction is that the new creates, but it destroys the old. Well, the old are never happy being destroyed. So there ends up being power shifts. There ends up being societal power shifts, economic power shifts, and obviously business power shifts. And they become very disruptive periods. So if you take the current wave, we're being impacted by hyper-competition, globalization, and technological disruption that has a whole host of different effects. Digital competition, much more demanding customers and consumers, changing market boundaries, aggressive global competition, massive speed of technological change, etc., etc. The one thing that I find very interesting is that in this wave, there is no industry that is not impacted by it. So in the previous waves, you could look back and there were certain industries that weren't really affected by the nature of this creative disruption forces. But in this wave, everyone's feeling it because of digital products. Digital products, digital technology, software is affecting every organization across the world. The big challenge in the upswing is that while technology change at an exponential rate, people don't. Our political systems, our leadership styles, even our ability to absorb change is very linear in nature. So we get a gap between the rate of change and our ability to process and manage that change. And that causes tensions. And those tensions sometimes erupt into violence, into social disruption. So here we have two images, both from Paris. The first one, obviously, in the French Revolution, where you had huge levels of inequality from the rich and the poor. And the second one is the Yellow Vest protests that are taking place right now, which is these anti-globalist movements, where people are feeling left behind by the rate of change. And the upswing is also a time of uncertainty and unpredictability. So we have a whole host of sort of black swan events that are taking place, the coronavirus being the latest one. The danger is they cause a lot of black swan reactions. And these black swan reactions create black swan consequences. So a good example could be the current pandemic. The current pandemic at the start caused a reaction where there was a mass rush for toilet paper. Now, this was completely unexpected because actually it wasn't a gastro-based illness. So why should there be a rush for toilet paper? Now, because there was a rush for toilet paper, what happened was people were buying things like kitchen paper and wet wipes and using those, and they were flushing those down the toilet. That was blocking the sewage systems. So we had people buying things that they didn't need to buy, causing a run and shortage on other products which were affected by it, which were then being flushed down the toilet, causing future problems such as sewage blockages, all to do with something that actually was completely unpredictable. So each one of these reactions and consequences was not needed. My apologies. One of the things that's really interesting in the sixth wave is how it shifted the balance of power and increased consumer expectations. So the example I like to use is this. The industry in the fifth wave that really got affected by the digital revolution was the media industry. So when I was growing up, I and my friends and everyone around us knew exactly what we were going to be watching that day. There was one television in the house, and there was a Radio Times, or TV Times as they call them in the UK, which had a schedule, and it says, this is what you're going to be watching at certain points in time. So the family would sit around one television and watch the same program at the same time. And then we would go into work the next day, and you could say, did you see the film last night? And people would know exactly what film you were talking about because there was only one film on. Now we live in a Netflix world. Now digital has disrupted the media industry. So if I went into work, into the office and said, did you see the film last night? People would look at me like I'm crazy because what film are you talking about? That you could have watched any film from the entirety of human history pretty much via Netflix or Amazon or even just things like YouTube. So we end up with the customer being in control, deciding what they're going to watch, when they're going to watch it, on what device they're going to watch it. But the creative destruction nature of that means that actually in the creation of these new technologies, there are social implications to that because we end up with pictures like we see here where we have families together but apart. And people are increasingly more connected digitally, but not so connected in reality. So there are always fallbacks. And one of the things I found out in the writing of my book is technology always is a double-edged sword. There are always two sides of it, a positive side and a negative side. But what's happened here, and this is epidemic across all industries, is that now the consumer is increasingly in control of the equation. And it's even affecting the way we parented. So, for example, when I was growing up, I was always told, don't sit within 2 feet of the television, otherwise you will get square eyes, Sean. Now we literally strap the screens to our children's faces so they're only 2 centimeters away because we have all of these new technologies. So it's changed our very paradigms and the way we parent. One of the things I think is really interesting, specifically for the new generation, the millennials and the Gen Zs, is how much convenience matters to them. And this is perhaps one of the things that Amazon tapped into really, really quickly, is convenience is king to the new consumers. If you can find a way to make things more convenient, you'll win their business. And we're seeing increasingly the rise of things like Uber Eats or DoorDash or Just Eat, these app-based tools that enable food to come to you rather than you having to go to food. Now, this is all very well, but supplying this new business model dramatically increases the complex at an exponential rate. So what do we mean by that? Well, we mean previously we used to have to deliver things in a very linear way. We would move goods from a warehouse to a store, the customer would go to the store, and that's the way things were delivered. So it was a very supply push, linear supply chain. However, now we're in this consumer-centric network where effectively the supply chain is a circle with the consumer at its heart. And the consumer can engage multiple different ways with the retailer, and they can ask for things to be delivered multiple different places. So we have a sort of omni-channel demand signal, but also an omni-channel logistics model as well. Which means we've moved away from this kind of situation where most people, certainly in the West, every weekend would travel to a supermarket and they would do their entire weekly shop and they would fill the baskets up, and then they would queue for a long time in order to take everything out of the basket, put it on a conveyor belt, get everything paid for, put it back into the basket, take it to their cars, and then drive back home. And what we ended up doing was creating a supply model specifically for groceries, which involves very large out-of-store supermarkets with massive car parks for this mobile consumer base to travel to the supermarket in order to buy their goods. Now, that model has changed dramatically, and the pandemic has accelerated this, as I will discuss in a moment. Now, we have technology that says, well, actually, we want the retailer to deliver to us. And that might be to our house, or to the boot of our car, or to a smart locker, or even with products like Amazon Key, I want you to deliver it inside my house. And you've got smart cameras and smart locks that allow them to have a one-time access into your house. So now the retailer and the logistics company have to go from delivering to one central location to multiple small locations, creating an exponential level of complexity. And one of the other things this has done, and again, Amazon was probably one of the first companies to realize that in order for people to trust e-commerce, they had to be able to understand how they return goods, not just how they purchase goods. So 2/3 of e-commerce customers check the returns policy before making a buying decision to make sure that they can return it. And 30% of e-commerce sales are returned. Now, returns, certainly in the 90s, when I was starting out in supply chain, we're an incredibly small part of most companies' business, a small corner of the warehouse, which had one or two things returned a week. But now 30% of e-commerce items are coming back. In fact, Gartner did a study that said the single biggest source of inventory for most e-commerce based warehouse is returns. And companies like Amazon are continually ratcheting up the equation. So Amazon for a long time now has offered free 48-hour shipping. Last year, they basically spent a large sum of money and brought that down to one-day delivery for prime customers in the US, and they're looking to roll that out across the rest of the countries where they operate. And they said they've got over 10 million items now that are available for same-day shipping. Well, that creates an immediate competitive response, because if I can buy whatever I want and get it delivered same day from Amazon, well, I'm going to defer to them if everyone else takes 2 days or 3 days or 4 days to deliver. So big retailers like Walmart had to basically respond to that incredibly quickly and actually also offer free same-day shipping. So now the base expectation for most customers is, I want to be able to order stuff today and I want to get it today, tomorrow at the very latest. That changes their entire paradigm about what is an acceptable level of delivery time. Now, this upswing is a time of exponential progress, and I particularly like this Elwood Hubbard quote that says, the world is moving so fast these days that the man who says it can't be done is generally interrupted by someone doing it. And he said that in 1927. So if he thought that 1927 was a period of exponential change, imagine what he'd have to say now. Because we're here, we're at this tipping point. We're in the upswing, and what we're getting together is a clustering of new paradigm shifting technologies that have been played around with in the background since about 2010, 2012. And because we have social media, maybe we've seen some of the videos of some of these technologies, but we haven't seen them around yet. We haven't seen them necessarily in our everyday lives. We've maybe seen some videos and that's all. But we're now at this tipping point where these deceptive innovations start to come out into the marketplace, and very rapidly, as we move up the S-curve, become incredibly disruptive. To give you an example of what it looks like at that period, at that tipping point, the automobile was being developed behind the scenes since the very late sort of 19th century, but people generally didn't see them around. So this is a picture from Fifth Avenue in New York in 1908. And you can see here, everyone's still walking or is in a horse-drawn carriage. Just after that, there was the tipping point for the third wave. 5 years later, and that still plenty of people walking around, but in terms of the mode of transport, as you can see, it's gone from horses to cars in an incredibly short period of time. So that's a real paradigm shift as to how people move long distances in an incredibly short period of time. But what is the equivalent of that in the current day? Well, I'm going to use an example by a gentleman called Hans Moravec. And I talk about Hans Moravec in my book. Now, Hans Moravec has a paradox named after him. And Hans Moravec was an AI researcher, one of the very early AI researchers. And he said the one thing we've learned over 35 years of artificial intelligence development is that the things that humans find very difficult to do, such as advanced calculus and processing huge amounts of information, actually machines find incredibly easy. It's very easy for us to program that. But the things that humans find very simple to do, movement, picking objects up, spatial awareness, color differentiations, shape identifications, are actually really, really hard to do from an artificial intelligence and a robotics perspective. And if you go back to 2015, only 5 years ago now, and you look at the DARPA annual competition, which is the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency in the United States, they have an annual competition to find the world's most advanced robotics, and they set them a series of very basic tasks. You know, walk, drive a vehicle, open the door, these sorts of things. And if you watch the videos from that year, each robot's falling around, it can't stand upright, it's toppling over. It's a whole series of very comical imagery of these robots being able to do the very basic things that we as humans can do. However, 2 years later, and Boston Dynamics showcased their Atlas robot doing backflips off raised platforms. So in a very short period of time, we went from robots that couldn't stand on their own to one that could do gymnastics. And 2 years after that, and we had effectively, you know, dancing robots, backflipping robots, robots that could open doors to let in other robots, robots that could work in logistics and can move around and everything. So again, we've gone from a world where these robots were almost embarrassingly pathetic to incredibly advanced in a very, very short time span because we're in this upswing period. Now, this automation is coming together and it's going to transform the supply chain. And it is creating something that I called the creative destruction triple whammy in my book. And what do I mean by that? What is the triple whammy? Well, whammy number one is horizontal convergence. So this is across the end-to-end supply chain, the automation of all physical tasks. So all the things that we used to do with the things on the ends of our wrists, picking fruit and vegetables out of the ground, putting things on shelves, driving vehicles, packing, loading, all of those sorts of things are about to be automated. Whammy number two is vertical convergence, so from leadership down. This is the automation of knowledge-based tasks. So this is the one that has most people concerned because up until now, human beings have been the only ones that can perform real sort of cerebral activities. So things like planning and forecasting and those sorts of tasks have all been very much a human endeavor. But that's changing, and it's changing really, really quickly. And Whammy number 3 is the technological versions of Whammy number 1 and Whammy number 2 coming together to create a fully automated end-to-end supply chain. So these are technologies that are basically machine brains driving and controlling machine hands. And this is where we're starting to talk about things like the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything and the blockchain coming together with artificial intelligence control towers that receive sensors on robots and trucks and 3D printers and collecting data from across the end-to-end supply chain and bringing it together to effectively an artificial brain to analyze, process, and even in some cases control. Now, the real kicker is that all 3 of these transformations, all 3 of these whammies are happening at exactly the same time, meaning most people are really struggling to keep up. So if I look at whammy number 1 across the supply chain areas of source, make, deliver, and sell, and you can see that ultimately what we have is we have a model that looks a little bit like this. So in the source world, we have robots that can now do things that only nimble fingers used to be able to do, be that pick oranges from trees or grapes from a vineyard or strawberries out of the ground. We have trucks now. At the second image down, there's a truck there. That's at the Rio Tinto plant in Australia. There's no one in that truck. That entire mine is completely autonomous, and it has been completely autonomous since 2012. Those trucks have done around about 5 million kilometers without a single accident. Beneath that, you see the ship, which is designed by Rolls-Royce. They are hoping to make the entire ocean-going fleet autonomous by 2035. Beneath that, you see an autonomous cargo plane that Airbus is working on. And underneath that, you'll see images from Rotterdam. Rotterdam was the world's first autonomous port. And it was the only autonomous port for 2 or 3 years, until people realized that the efficiencies they could gain was enormous. And now most ports around the world, specifically the ones that are being developed by China in its One Belt program, are all being made autonomous. What about make? What about manufacturing? Well, manufacturing was probably one of the first areas to be affected by robotics, specifically in the automotive industries, because these robots were expensive and single purpose. They only did one thing. They were very dangerous, and if you got in the way of them, they'd kill you. So they had to be put in cages. So they only made sense where you had a high degree of repetitive manufacturing of high value, high volume items, such as cars. Only now in that second image down, we have collaborative robots like Baxter and Sawyer there, which can do multiple different things. You can change the end of arm toolings. You train them simply by showing them what to do. They can go anywhere, do anything from packing to line loading to picking to machine tendering. There's a whole host of different things the same robot can do, which means the return on investment of these robots is dramatically higher and also incredibly quick. Underneath that, you see a jet engine. That jet engine has been 3D printed in titanium, so we're now able to 3D print things in metals, incredibly complex items. The little image underneath that is something called clip printing. So this is by a company called Carbon. This is printing solid items out of liquid. So this is a sort of reinvention of the concept of 3D printing. And underneath that, you can see a house there that's been 3D printed in China. So China specifically are using 3D printers to print buildings, so very big things. What about deliver? Deliver was an area that got away with robotics and automation for a long time. You always needed human hands to pick, pack, load, put away. Warehouses that needed human hands. Driving needed human hands. All of that is changing incredibly rapidly. Amazon was probably the first one to bring sort of the capability of robotics to mainstream attention when it acquired Kiva Robotics back in 2012 for $775 million. And this changed the paradigm from people walking to inventory to the inventory coming to the person. Underneath that, you can see Vera's Project Vera by Volvo. This is fully autonomous trucking, which we've been working on for some time. You can see there's no cab on that truck because there doesn't need to be, because the truck's autonomous. Drones are starting to take off significantly. Again, the pandemic has been rocket fuel to this. Road robots, the Starship robot there, you can see these in numerous American and UK cities. Then you go to places like Milton Keynes in the middle of the UK, that you'll see these robots trundling around all over the place. And even the concept of putting these robots into autonomous vans, so that effectively a van becomes a mobile warehouse that drives to a suburban location, where those robots will then scatter and deliver the goods to the consumer, has been developed by amalgamation of Starship Robotics and Mercedes-Benz. Finally, to sell. At the top there, you can see what looks like someone taking a bottle of Coca-Cola. In reality is what he's doing is using his phone to scan an item that will then be delivered to his house within 30 minutes. And that whole display is just that. It's a display. They are not real products. And in fact, the people at the back there are boarding a train. And this is basically the concept of saying, I don't need to physically have a store. I just need to have a space where I can roll out a display of the items that I would sell in that store, and then I will get them delivered to the customer directly to their houses. So this is a segmented range of products that people would want to buy on their way home from work. So in this case, soft drinks, milk, cheese, bread, all the sort of consumable items. And all he's doing is basically scanning an image, and it will be delivered to their house. Amazon Go, 2 years ago, announced that it was working on this just walk out technology. This is now being rolled out across the UK and across the US, where effectively the most inconvenient part of shopping is the bit at the end, the bit where I have to take everything out of my basket and pay for it, and then put it back into my basket and walk out. What happens if I don't have to pay for it? What happens if I just take the items off the shelf and just walk out? And that's exactly what they've developed with a series of cameras and scanners and machine learning technology. They're now able to present a store which effectively has no cash points. Underneath that, you can see a little robot there talking to a woman who's shopping. That's called Pepper. That robot is a humanoid robot that has a tablet on its chest. It has full access to all the data about all of your customers. It converses by voice and by movement. And it can be used in concierge services like hotels. It can be used in things like hospitals, where it's used to basically greet people and take them to the ward that they're, the person they've come to see is on. It's used in retail. It's used in airports across the US. So this is, again, another way of being able to engage with customers using robotics. But they have something that humans find incredibly difficult to do. They have access to vast amounts of information, and they're also able to store vast amounts of information. So I used to work in retail when I was a young man, and if the boss would come into the store and he would ask me, how did today go? I would be able to tell him whether or not it was busy or whether or not it was quiet. I would maybe be able to remember one or two things that were sold that day. That was it. That was the sum total of the information he would get from me. These Baxter robots, these Pepper robots, sorry, they'll tell you everything. They tell you exactly how many people they engaged in, whether or not they were an existing customer or not, what they bought, a photo and an image of them so you can understand the demographic. So a huge amount of data being captured by these machines, which are effectively platforms. And by platform, I mean they can do many different things based on the code that you give them, in the same way that your phone can do many different things based on the apps that you load. Underneath that, you have an Amazon Echo. Amazon Echo is a device that Amazon produces. I'm sure some of you have seen these, that you converse with by voice. It has an artificial intelligence system built into it called Alexa that's constantly being updated. And you can ask it everything. You can talk to it. It'll play music. But the most important thing that Amazon wants you to be able to do is to order via it using your voice. Now, what possibly could be easier than ordering things by voice? Well, what about if the machine orders it for you? So Amazon, again, has this Dash replenishment program where there's little pieces of code that are installed into various pieces of technology in your house, printers, water filters, those sorts of things, washing machines, that basically mean that when they're running low on the consumable items, such as the printer ink or the water filter, the machine itself just places the order. Where does it place the order? It places the order, of course, with Amazon. So the 6 waves workforce looks a little bit different to the 5th waves workforce. We're looking at these sort of collaborative robots here, which have huge benefits. They're incredibly flexible. They can do many different things. They deliver a rapid return on investment. They can work 24/7. They don't need to take breaks. They don't need to go home and see their families. And they present greater insight into what's actually happening in your business by providing operation performance insights that humans simply can't do. This is having a really interesting effect on global supply chains, and this is going to again be exponentially advanced through the pandemic, because a lot of companies are realizing that their supply chains are quite fragile. And what's happening is companies are bringing a lot of their manufacturing closer to where their consumers are, but using automation, not people, to make their products. An interesting one I want to pick up on here is the Sobot machine. Now, you may remember the Rana Plaza design that took place in Bangladesh, where most people in the West realized that the cost of disposable fashion was effectively disposable lives, when it realized that there were people working in conditions that in the West had been done away with 200 years previously in order to make these incredibly cheap t-shirts and these incredibly cheap clothes. Now, of course, that doesn't go down very well. So now what they're looking at is these machines that said, look, if we've got a machine here that can make as many t-shirts in an hour as 17 factory workers, why do we need to buy these goods from places like Bangladesh? Why don't we just make them close to where our consumer base is? And you have companies like Adidas who's moved its manufacturing back to Germany, but using robots to make it. Amazon now will offer on-demand clothing. It's had a patent for on-demand manufacturing since 2011. And now if you go onto Amazon, it has this thing called Merck by Amazon, which basically says if you've got an idea to design some clothes, you don't need to set a factory up. You don't need to figure out anything to do with manufacturing or 3PL for distribution. We'll do all of that. You send us our design, we'll make it, ship it. You can use our entire marketplace to reach millions of customers. You just pass over the rights to us to do the manufacturing. You just do the designing. So effectively, we get manufacturing as a service. The danger, the difference in this wave to the previous waves, and I get asked this question quite a lot because we've been through multiple automation revolutions, is that these machines aren't replacing jobs. They're actually replacing human capabilities. And they're replacing these human capabilities for a very, very low price point. So Baxter and Sawyer there, for example, who work in manufacturing and picking and packing, cost about $25,000 each. Pepper only costs $1,600 for its first month's rental, and then just $200 a month afterwards. Again, incredibly cheap. And what's happening is we're developing all of the human sensors, but using artificial intelligence. So these robots are able to see, hear, speak, understand, and translate. So you imagine that robot, Pepper, being built with this Google Translate technology, which it is, which means it can transcribe and translate speech in 8 languages in real time. So you can talk to that robot in 8 different languages, and it will be able to speak back to you in that language. Even smelling now. So we've now got new artificial intelligence systems that pass as a smell test. So that's particularly important in things like customs, but it's also important in a lot of food manufacturing where people smell the food products to understand whether or not they're actually of good enough quality. And the one thing that has most people worried is that this is not the end result of these machines. They're getting smarter all the time. So Google's that basically has figured out it's artificial intelligence that is used with Google Translate program is now able to translate between languages it wasn't taught to translate, because once it understood the structure of languages, it realized that it could translate pretty much between any language. You didn't have to program it. Now you pour all of these technologies into something like the retail industry, and you realize that that whole industry is about to be transformed. But so will the logistics that supports that industry. So I talked a moment ago about the checkout free store, the Amazon Go, and you can see that very quickly, once they realized they got this concept to work, the technology worked, Amazon is rolling this out for 3,000 stores across the US by 2021. It's already located where these stores are going to go in London. And once people get used to the concept of going into the store, buying goods, and not having to wait to pay, they will prefer to do this because, as I said at the start, convenience is a major winner for most people. If you can make my life more convenient, specifically when I have little time, then I will actually choose that. And Amazon has realized that this doesn't have to just be small stores. I can point this technology anywhere that people buy stuff. So they're looking at it, putting it in airports, at movie theaters, at using it in anywhere where people normally go and have to queue to pay at the end. Now, of course, Amazon doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has competitors. And these competitors have to respond immediately to whatever Amazon does. So the moment Amazon releases this, Tesco's and Sainsbury's and 7-Eleven and Walmart and Albert Heijn over in Europe, for me said, we have to have this technology as well. Now, the interesting thing is Amazon realized that these other companies are so far behind them in terms of technological capability that they're actually offering this technology for sale now, because they realize that these other organizations, these other retailers will develop it sooner or later. So why don't we sell it and why don't we make money off it? So Amazon is now selling that technology to all these other retailers, which means you're going to get this exponential adoption of this kind of technology, which really opens the eyes to the possibility of it. So this is a quote from Marit van Hentmund, who's the brand president at Albert Heijn, one of the retailers that I talked about. And they said, basically, this latest concept not only makes shopping very easy due to its autonomous nature, but means we can basically have a plug-and-play store that can be placed at locations which didn't make sense before, which wasn't profitable for us to do it because we used to have to pay people, and maybe we didn't have enough footfall. But it means we can put a store in an office or a university campus or residential areas that do not yet have shopping facilities. And the other benefit is because I don't need to have people in the store other than to restock it, I can be open all the time. So it can be open 24/7, which means for people in a more 24/7 based lifestyle, shift workers, those sorts of people, there's always a store where they can buy things. And we're now using different technologies so that even the bit at the end doesn't involve the transfer of cash. So Amazon wants to sort of turn your hand into a credit card by using biometrics. The pandemic, however, may affect that because people don't like touching things anymore. What will take off and has taken off already massively throughout China and is moving across Europe right now is facial payment systems. So effectively, you know, in the same way that these phones can be opened via your face, you can now pay via your face. And we also want engaging more and more with technology via our voice. So Walmart partnered with Google so that the Google Home Hubs allows them to basically say, Google's speak to Walmart, and then you just basically say out loud what products you want. It adds it up into a shopping list. Walmart delivers it to you. Starbucks and Alibaba have launched voice ordering. McDonald's wants to bring its voice technology to drive-through. 7-Eleven now offers voice ordering. So increasingly, the way we engage with companies, specifically retailers, is going to be via voice. Now, how do I deliver this? That's great that you can order by voice or by face or whatever, but I've got to get the goods to you, and I've got to get the goods to you really quickly. And what's happening here is we're now seeing a full automation of warehouse and logistics. So this company here, the images here I'm showing you is by a company called Fabric that used to be called Common Sense Robotics. And they're looking at using underground car parks and spaces like that and converting them into warehouses. What they call ASRS systems, automatic storage and retrieval systems, where effectively inventory moves up and down racking, and there's no need for any people to be involved in the equation at all, because even at the end, robots are putting the product away. And it's the only way, really, we can actually get goods to customers in a cost-effective manner. Now, these robots are not ubiquitous yet. So at the moment, companies like Amazon are using this sort of gig economy model of having bicycle couriers or people in their cars delivering the goods to the customer manually using their own hands. But these are just temporary solutions, and they're just temporary jobs. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, the road robots, the things I talked about earlier, are now crossing the chasm into the mainstream. So Starship Robotics that I talked about earlier, you know, it took 4 years for them to reach 10,000 deliveries, then 8 months to get to 50,000, then another 4 months to reach 100,000, and only 2 more months to achieve 150,000. So they're on this exponential curve now. Amazon took one look at that and thought, well, we can use that technology as well. So Amazon is rolling out these robots across the US as well. So this is increasingly becoming the way that we are able to deliver goods to households in a cost-effective manner, because these robots effectively run for the cost of electricity. Drones. We've been talking about drones for a number of years now, but we've not seen them, but they're starting to happen. And again, the pandemic has probably been rocket fuel for this, because there's been a need to move goods to locations very, very rapidly, and specifically medical supplies, and drone technology has been used to do this. But last year, in 2019, most of the drone companies, Amazon, Google, FedEx, all these people got approval, specifically in the US and in the UK, for drones that go beyond the line of sight. So we're pretty much going to see in the next 12 to 18 months, a world of drone deliveries emerging. And autonomous vehicles, again, I showed you Vera, the Volvo trucks version earlier, but there's loads of money now being invested in autonomous trucks. And in the US, autonomous trucks, most people don't know this, but autonomous trucks have been running for about a year now in the United States. They've been running up and down, predominantly up and down the West Coast. They don't go inside cities. They usually go from fulfillment center to fulfillment center, up and down the straight highways. So at the moment they are being used, and they're being used quite a lot. Most people don't know this, but they're just going up and down highways. Very soon the technology will advance where they can go into more urban areas. And companies like Daimler and Starship, which I mentioned earlier, but also Ford with agility robots, are combining robots and autonomous vehicles together, so that the autonomous vehicle can go to a suburban location, and then the robot can do the last mile or the last step of the delivery. So we're sort of bringing these technologies together. Now, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, the pandemic is about to take these technologies into the mainstream, not through supply push, but from demand pull. And it's added rocket fuel to this automation revolution. So COVID-19 has altered the norms of human society, the way we meet strangers by shaking their hands or greeting friends, or even the way we work together in crowded offices or eat out in crowded restaurants, or even paying by cash. Even down to the way we greet animals. I mean, I live in the UK. The UK is a very, very dog-friendly country. Everyone has dogs. When dog runs up to pay you, we used to immediately give the dog a stroke. You can't do that anymore, because obviously you could be transmitting the virus. So these sort of norms of human society are being completely upended, and it's not going to be a short-term thing. Most of these are not going to come back in the same way. And it's created what I call an isolation economy. People have become used to living at home and working from home and ordering takeaway food. And some people can't wait for this to end. And other people think, do you know what? This is actually more convenient for me. So we've seen a massive record in downloads of grocery delivery apps. We've seen a number of companies that have realized that their operation can work quite effectively without everyone spending an hour and a half or 2 hours a day commuting to a single office. They've realized that most people now don't need to go to the cinema every week. We're quite happy watching Netflix and getting the films on Netflix. So our behavioral changes are likely to be here beyond the pandemic. So this pandemic is creating behaviors and expectations that I think will become embedded into the DNA of society moving forwards. So if we look at the behavioral change, let's look at what the new normal is going to be. So the behavioral changes, we've been used to use online shopping versus physical, and food delivery versus restaurants. Well, that's caused an e-commerce boom and the death of large shopping malls. Most food establishments now have had to change their business models from one where the customer comes to them to where they deliver food to the customer. We're becoming incredibly cash averse. People don't like handling cash because obviously cash carries huge amounts of germs on them. So we're going to see a massive increase in cashless, contactless payment systems, be that tap or facial payment systems. People want on-demand access to goods and services. We're not happy to wait anymore. So there's going to be an increase in one-hour deliveries and offerings around automated urban warehouses. Delivery robots and drones are going to be preferred over humans because they're non-biological. People are going to want locally produced goods and services and not stuff that's been shipped halfway around the world. So we're seeing a massive demand for fresh local produce. Booms in things like vertical automated farming operations and local shops. Working from home is going to become the new normal. Working from anywhere. It doesn't have to be your home. It could be anywhere you have an internet connection. And this is going to increase dramatically with things like 5G, because we're able to have telepresence and remote working pretty much, ubiquitously across most of our locations. Well, that's going to have an impact, a positive impact in terms of congestion and road traffic and car parking, enable us to redistribute all of this land that had been given up to car parking to more housing or more leisure style activities. We're going to avoid we're going to continue social distancing and avoid large gatherings. So we're seeing a boom in home-based entertainment and virtual reality and gaming, but also a decline in group-based activities such as cinemas and theatres. And we're going to be minimizing human-to-human contact. People are continuously nervous about human-to-human contact. So we're going to see this cashierless, just walk out shopping become the new normal. You see, the reality of the upswing is that humans are too slow. Our forecasting is too inaccurate. Our planning is too infrequent. There are too many black swans. Human behavior is too irrational, and expectations are too demanding. Our supply chains now need to adapt in real time. And we're just not up to it. Which brings me to whammy number 2, the automation of knowledge work. So what's actually happening is we're having to develop machines that learn for themselves. So the concept of machine learning is machines figuring out how to complete tasks without being explicitly programmed to do so. And I like this quote here from a gentleman I met a few years ago now called Alex Harvey, who's the head of robotics and autonomous systems for a major retailer in the UK called Ocado. He said, "We just can't deal with the uncertainties. We cannot write enough if-then-else statements to cover all possible scenarios. Machines are having to figure it out for themselves." So things like planning now and forecasting, things that a lot of people spent a lot of time trying to become good at, we've realized that, machines are just better than this at us. They can process more data, they can consider more variables than we as humans can do. They aren't embedded with biases. They're not careless or fearless, where most forecasters are either not very good at their job, or they're driven by sales targets that are overly optimistic. So we're now to the point where AI is able to do something statistical models can't do, which is identify non-linear relationships. And companies like Amazon said, you know what, our forecasting using artificial intelligence is now so good, we pretty much know what you're going to order before you order it. So why don't you just let us send it to you? We have this evolution of this self-aware, self-driving cognitive supply chain. So level 1 is, descriptive analysis, where we're able to put sensors and capture data from our supply chain that tells us what's going on. So in this example here, it's telling us that we're in a traffic jam. Okay, I knew that, but thank you. Level 2 is it's telling us, what, we're about to be in a traffic jam. So from a supply chain perspective, it's giving us some predictions based on past behaviors of what's likely to happen. Level 3 is really where we want to be. I don't want to be in a traffic jam, so give me options. Give me recommendations for how we beat the traffic in this example. Or if it's a supply chain perspective, give me ways that I avoid the bullwhip effect, or I avoid having stock shortages or excess inventory. And level 4 is a fully autonomous planning and response system, a self-driving supply chain. So level 1 and level 2 is basically humans making decisions, taking data from machines. Level 3 is humans making decisions using recommendations from machines. And level 4 is machines making the decisions and then telling the humans what they've done. Now, you might think that level 4 are decades away. It's not. It's already here. And in fact, later today, I'm on another webinar with the company that's able to do that, called Era. And you can communicate with that technology by voice, and it will communicate with you by voice. It will tell you what's going on in your supply chain, where you need to look, what decisions it's made. In fact, companies like Merck Healthcare that have already implemented Era, and Johnson & Johnson and other companies are using it as well, have managed to automate 60% of their product range. No human intervention. And the buying, the shipping, the storing, and the selling of it, all done autonomously. So we're able now to use these technologies that says, if demand falls within expected demand or supply tolerances, so if we have things that we expect, deviations that we expect, we can automate that. We can let the machines make that decision. If we get into the realms of abnormal demand or abnormal supply, then tools like Era will recommend what actions to take. And if we have exceptional events, black swans, then we can use these tools to simulate what our options are so that we can actually make a decision. The problem we have is that the number of data inputs we receive into these planning systems are increasing exponentially. Machine brain power is improving exponentially, but our human cognitive capability is remaining static. And the machines are now able to track whether its recommendations were followed. And if they weren't followed, if the human came in and changed them, it will measure whether or not it worsened or improved the outcome. Over time, we're going to establish that human biases, limited cognitive power, and our attachments to past knowledge are basically just bottlenecks and the cause of bad decisions. You see, right now, Era and tools like it are what they call glass boxes. They will come up with a recommendation, they will come up with a decision, but you can see the workings, you can see how it came up with that decision. As it increasingly takes data from more and more sources, we're going to get to the point which says, we don't understand what you're telling us. Why don't you just make those decisions? We trust you. And they will increasingly move to what we call black box solutions, where the computer just makes a decision and we just follow it. And the supply chain becomes more and more autonomous. So we're ending up with a supply chain where increasingly robots will do the making and the moving. Tools that I haven't discussed yet, like blockchain, will record the transactions. Robotic process automation, these little tools called RPA, little piece of software, will do all the back office ERP updates. Chatbots and digital assistants will handle all the queries, and sitting on top of all of it will be an artificial intelligence control tower that will analyze the data, identify issues, and recommend solutions. And the thing is, we haven't seen anything yet. We're only at the start of this curve, not the end. So the growth of robots and artificial intelligence is going to explode. We're now entering the quantum era. So all of the stuff I've talked to so far has been done with traditional computing power. But last year, Google achieved quantum supremacy. Quantum supremacy is the ability of quantum computers to solve a problem that we don't believe it would have been possible for traditional computers to solve. So their quantum computer system, called Sycamore, basically took 200 seconds to solve a problem that Google believes it would take the world's best supercomputer 10,000 years to complete. Now, why do we use quantum computing? Now, if you imagine a world of autonomous cars and autonomous trucks all moving around huge urban centers, to collect data from every one of those vehicles, process it in microseconds, needs vast amounts of computing power. And this is where quantum computing comes in. And in fact, Volkswagen last year, the end of October, optimized the traffic flow out in, I believe it was in Barcelona, where they had a conference on, and there was 100,000 people hit the city all at the same time. And they used quantum computing to basically control all the traffic lights and control these autonomous buses that they'd set up to move people from the conference venue to their hotels. Quantum computing is progressing at what is called a double exponential rate. So the fifth wave, all of the progress of the fifth wave and progress in the sixth wave to date has been done using traditional computing power. And traditional computing power has been moving at an exponential rate via something called Moore's law. Moore's law is the law that says every 2 years, 18 months to 2 years, the processing power of transistor chips doubles, but their cost halves. And it looks a little bit like this. So this is an exponential curve. We move, this is classical computing power at an exponential curve. Harmat Nevin, who is a director of engineering at Google and the leader of the quantum AI laboratory, says that quantum computing is progressing at double exponential rate, which is now called Nevin's law. That's Nevin's law rate of progress compared to Moore's law. So if you look at Moore's law and think this is how much we've been able to advance our computing power, and then you look at Nevin's law, that's the rate at which quantum computing is developing. Now you bring all these technologies together and you get Whammy number 3, where we end up looking like this, where we have artificial intelligence driven by machine learning, cognitive computing, and quantum computing, basically receiving data and controlling robots, autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, 5G enabled devices, this collection of different sensors and connected technologies. It's all sending data and receiving data from these artificial brains in the center of them. One of the key technologies to this is 5G. And the implementation and adoption of 5G is going to be exponential. The coronavirus has fast forwarded it. So we're likely to see, because of the demand for remote working and the demand for so many people using telepresence tools, people are now pushing for 5G to be implemented. And 5G will enable the two things to come together. The industrial Internet of Things, where we have sensors and everything from wind turbines to trucks to 3D printers to robots to pipelines, all the way through to the consumer Internet of Things, where we have sensors in our smartwatch or our phone or our television or our washing machine or our thermostat. And it's collecting all of this data. So changes in the consumer Internet of Things drives changes in the industrial Internet of Things. And what this enables us to do is to create digital twins, where we're able to create digital representations of physical objects using these sensors, the 5G-enabled sensors. And that could be a machine, it could be a pipeline like a utilities, it could be an entire vehicle like a ship or a plane, or it could be a building. So we're having sensors that identify whether or not a warehouse or an office is occupied and how many people are using it. And as these technologies come together, they're going to create a paradigm shift in the supply chain. In the 5th wave, the best supply chain in the world was the invisible supply chain, the supply chain that nobody heard about. In the 6th wave, the best supply chain in the world will be the one that's completely visible and completely transparent, where the people in control see everything that's going on, all the way down to the supplier's supplier from the customer's customer. What do I mean by visibility? I mean the visibility of flows, the flow of product, physical product, the flow of information, and even the flow of money. That enables me to have visibility of the different costs and risks in my supply chain. How much power am I consuming? How much water am I consuming? Where are my wastes? Where am I got too much inventory or not enough inventory? Where have I got stock shortages? Where have I got time constraints? Where are my weak spots in my supply chain? And once I can understand that, I can then also have visibility into my impact of my supply chain, the ethical impact, the ecological impact, and also in terms of things like corruption, the economic impact of my supply chain. So we end up with this thing that Salah mentioned at the start, which is the PAL supply chain, where we have highly personalized products, services, and experiences with automated manufacturing, delivering, and planning, and local production, storage, and retail facilities. The good news is this is actually a much more sustainable supply chain. So we're going to drive down labor costs, drive down production costs, drive down inventory and waste, drive down transportation, drive down storage, drive down energy and water consumption, and drive down our lead times. And the shorter the supply chain, the more resilient, responsive, and agile and sustainable it is. Whereas the longer it is, the more inflexible, slower, and prone to unforeseen risks. So we're going to see a lot more reshoring and a lot more localized supply chains emerge. Now, the interesting thing from a business perspective is this is allowing companies to redefine value. So a whole node and no digital models are emerging. So all of these technologies, in the previous waves, in the fifth wave, you had to go and make them yourself. You would have to implement your own ERP systems. You would have to do your own things. Now these are coming across as a service. Software as a service, logistics as a service, space as a service, transportation as a service, manufacturing as a service, robotics as a service. Even artificial intelligence and quantum computing is now offered as a service. So I don't have to develop these things myself. I just need to understand how I can use them to deliver value. So a quick example of those are robotics as a service. So that Sobot robot I showed you earlier is now available as a service. So you don't have to buy the robot. And the return on investment, as you can see there, starts on day one. It has a per shift cost of $55. So I've got a robot there that can make as many t-shirts as an hour as 17 people, but only costs me $55 a shift. Well, that's cheaper than the lowest low-cost country. Nokia's worked on things called conscious factories in the boxes. So this is offering an entire factory as a service in a shipping container. So you can move these 5G connected manufacturing units wherever they're needed. And inside these, they have 3D printers, they have robots, they have all the different technologies needed to make whatever product it is that you need to manufacture. And Amazon Bracket, as you can see at the bottom there, is their AI as a service offering. So you can now go onto Amazon, look for Amazon Bracket, and you will see that you can now procure as a service access to their artificial intelligence capability. Sorry, quantum computing capability, not artificial intelligence, quantum computing capability. So we're moving from a world where companies compete to one where in 2001, one of my colleagues at Cranfield, Martin Christopher, said, now companies don't compete, supply chains compete. I don't think that's true anymore. I think now business models compete. The combination of a compelling value proposition to a defined customer segment with world-class execution capabilities. It's all about the business models. What do I mean about business models? Well, let's take two examples here, Blockbuster versus Netflix. I'm sure you're all aware of these two. Blockbuster was a very innovative company, but it only was able to innovate within its existing business model, which was physical stores. So within those physical stores, it did a lot of things. It brought in, snacks and popcorn and drinks. It went from films to games. It allowed you to buy and as well as rent. So it did a lot of innovation within its business model, but it couldn't move its paradigm from the physical store. The physical store required the customer to move to it, rent the goods, go back home, and then bring them back. So the physical customer was inconvenienced by their business model. Netflix was able to realize that actually what people want is not to go to a store. What people want is to be entertained. They want to watch a movie. So Netflix started with its putting discs into CDs and DVDs into envelopes, and then moved to streaming. So now we basically just ask our television to play the film that we want to watch. We don't have to move. So they've innovated and created a new business model, whereas Blockbuster could only innovate within its business model. And that's why Blockbuster no longer exists. Now, the really big challenge with all of this disruption is that success requires not just new machines, but new mindsets, new business models, and new methods. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean we're at the start of this wave. The disruption has only just begun. We've got another 10 to 15 years of this, at least. Most companies right now were structured for the past, not the future. They've got a top-down hierarchical command and control structure. Labor costs are going to be less and less relevant part of the equation, which is going to affect emerging nations specifically. Your existing assets might be built on fifth wave technology, so they're likely to be rendered obsolete. Technology is going to continue to undermine the advantages of scale. Traditionally organized companies, therefore, need to become much more agile. They need to develop the DNA of a digital organization, or they will become replaced. So they will need to become much more complex, adaptive, anticipatory systems, powered, hopefully, by machines. The problem is the leaders of most businesses were trained in the downswing when change was linear. They don't know how to handle the upswing when change is exponential. So we've got exponential technology, but linear leadership, and it's causing real issues for a lot of businesses. The main way that manifests itself is that we have a short-term culture driven by short-term thinking leaders. And the barriers to change, when I ask people, what is the thing that stops you from being able to adapt to this wave of change? The answers they come up with is, well, I'm constantly pressured to show immediate return on investment. We're constantly given a quarterly stock price focus. We have to meet the analyst expectations. We don't have a long-term vision. We've got lots of different silos in our organizations with different agendas and different metrics and different behaviors. We have our overarching fear of taking risks. And ultimately, what we're doing is we're not playing to win, but we're playing not to lose. And the reason for that is, this is the way, the leadership is driving it. The bottleneck is always, as Peter Drucker said, at the top of the bottle. I particularly like this quote here from Alvin Toffler, who said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, then unlearn, and then relearn. And it's very difficult because we hold on to our existing knowledge as if it's very precious. But don't get too hung up about technology, because technology is not teleology. Technology is only a how, it is not a why. And because it's not a why, it's why most companies who are invested heavily in things like digital technology have failed. 9 out of 10 digital transformation projects failed, 84% of failure around about. And that's because they don't have a clear and compelling why. Any company without a customer-centric strategy or any understanding of how these tools will enable that strategy is effectively a customer that's going to waste a lot of money. You see, what people need to understand is digital is not a project. It is a journey, not a destination. It is a paradigm shift in the organization's mindset, an opportunity to redefine what it stands for, how it operates, and what it rewards. Most companies need to have what I call a Copernican business revolution. So we used to believe that the Earth was at the center of the universe and the sun and all the planets circled us. We now know that's not true. That heliocentric model is not true. We now know that the sun is at the center of the universe and we circle it. We need to have that same business revolution. Most companies think their firm sits at the center of the universe and customers will constantly circle them. That's not true now. The customer should be the center of your universe and you need to circle them. So you need to become much more agile and customer-centric. We need to focus not on just telling them about our products, but understanding how to solve their problems. And this is exactly what Amazon does really, really well. It looks for points of inconvenience in the process, and it uses technology to remove that inconvenience. In this customer-centric world, we therefore need customer-centric, data-driven, human plus machine business models. I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by that. So this person here is called Kegan Fisher. I interviewed Kegan about 3 years ago now. And I interviewed her at the same time I interviewed a lot of the supply chain leaders of companies like Toyota and Ford and Daimler and Philips and other such organizations. I interviewed a lot of people all at the same time at a big event. Kegan was the CEO and founder of a digital organization, one where you could take photographs of your feet and 3D printers would generate orthotics for your feet that were personally designed to you. The way that Kegan talked was very different to the way every other leader who I interviewed spoke. She said to me, the challenge for us at Souls is, we're asking ourselves, how do we treat physical product like software? How do we innovate in real time? How do you create real-time closed-loop feedback cycles? Can we take data from my customer, plug it into an algorithm, and use that to generate a product? Then can we ship it to the customer, understand how they're interacting with it, pull data from that process back into the algorithms, and then use that to continually improve the physical product? And as I listened to Kegan, I thought, no one talks like that. I am constantly speaking to fifth wave leaders. This is the mindset of the sixth wave leader. So don't look at these technologies and think of them as just a way to automate existing jobs. That is very much a firm-centric fifth wave mindset. Instead, The job of technology, all this technology I've talked about, is to reimagine, redesign, and redefine your business model. What do I mean by that? I mean, can we use this to create more compelling value propositions or product innovations? Can we use these to create service innovations that help us to understand and meet the customer's needs better? Can we use them to improve the effectiveness of our delivery through network and supply chain innovations? And can we improve the efficiency and accuracy of the execution by doing things like removing human errors and creating process innovations? So when we actually look at this, and we should be asking ourselves questions like this. Product innovations, can we use these technologies to create radical new solutions? Can we use them to digitize our value propositions? Can we use them to servitize our offerings, premiumize it, personalize it, or even create more sustainable solutions? Could we use it to create service innovations? Could we use them to reach new customer segments, provide more reliable or responsive 24/7 services? Can we use it to create more compelling or personal experiences, or more personal communications, or better engagement with our company or our products? Can we use them to create process innovations? Can we use them to eliminate or reduce the number of human errors, to create more streamlined and aligned processes, to create better insights, more visibility, to redirect human effort from rules-based repetitive tasks into more value-adding tasks? Can we create safer ways of working? And finally, to the network, to the supply chain. Can we use them to create a more local, agile, or flexible supply chain, a more reliable or responsive supply chain, a more transparent supply chain, a more sustainable supply chain? Or even things like this post-pandemic world, can we use it to create more contact-free delivery mechanisms? Now I'm going to use a quote from my book Transition Point to finish off here. It's on page 330 if you have a copy. It says, if you had to rebuild your company today, knowing how people use technology, how they behave, what they value, and what is technically possible, would it resemble the company you currently work in? Because if it wouldn't, then the challenge for you in business is to change before a new competitor arrives that looks just like that and takes away your business. Because this new wave is both opportunity or threat, and creation or destruction. Which one it is entirely up to you. But one thing is clear, doing nothing is not an option. The challenge is, let's get our mindsets right, think digital, think about how we should reinvent our business models, then move to methods, finally machines, in that order. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. I hope you can hear me.
I can, yes.
Yeah. Let me try to arrange the questions which we have from the participants here. In the meantime, I'll ask the participants to raise their hands in the hand raising option, and from there on I'll take a few questions and then comments also. Okay. Let me go to the questions first. Why not begin from my own question?
Okay.
From Moore's law to Newton's law. Do you see yet another such law coming up or shaping up by the time 5G is fully there in the global world?
I hope not. I don't think we'll be able to. I don't think we'll be able to stand it. I think Newton's law is quite fast enough. Thank you very much. No, I think Moore's law. Everyone's predicted Moore's law will end. For the last 10, 15 years, I've been people saying that Moore's law can't continue, and yet it continues. And now when we move into the quantum era, we're looking at this Newton's law, and I think the rate of progress they're seeing is so fast, so exponential. I think anything faster than that, and we just simply won't be able to keep up with it.
Okay. We have a question from first from Mr. Irfan Qureshi from HBL, that is a local bank, Habib Bank Limited. How do you handle security issues related to robots and drones, especially in a developing country like Pakistan or elsewhere in the world?
Does that mean sort of cyber security and the data security, or just
Yeah.
Cybersecurity, I think cybersecurity is going to be a boom industry moving forward. One of the most areas of weakness, I would suggest, and as we become increasingly more connected, we obviously there are more points of failure, and as data becomes increasingly a currency, it becomes more valuable, and we've already seen a large number of data breaches. I think quantum computing is going to be used to create sort of more cryptography-based security mechanisms, but at the same time, quantum computing could also be used to crack those new sort of cryptography-based systems as well. So it is a big issue. I think there are multiple points of failure. We saw, I write about this in my book, with the Internet of Things, when people went to smart thermostats, for example, and smart devices in their houses, there was no security on them at all. So hackers were able to use these devices and just use them to create a denial of service attacks on places like Google, for example, bring down the internet, because they were able to access millions of these devices. So we're becoming more and more aware of the danger, but I think it's a very good point. And I think if you want to know what industry for your children to go into, cybersecurity would definitely be one I'd recommend.
Good. Aisha Chaudhary, she has a barrage of questions now. Please be patient. I'll give you one by one. Firstly, she asks, given AI is replacing human capabilities, what should global students be studying further in order to ride this sixth disruption wave?
That's a very good question. It's a question I get asked quite a lot, I should imagine.
Yeah.
I think the skills of the future are going to be much more around the thinking skills. It's going to be around not doing things that are easy to automate. So I use a line in my book that says, if we are training our children to compete against the machines, we are training our children to lose. So anything which is likely to be heavily automated, and in a lot of cases this means things like accountancy, for example, are going to be increasingly automated. Legal professions being increasingly automated. So we're moving to areas that involve high levels of creativity, high levels of empathy, high levels of critical thinking, high levels of doing the stuff that are very difficult to automate. So I think that's where the future will lie. But you have to also remember that a lot of traditional skill sets are also incredibly hard to automate. So I use the example and transition point of plumbing and electricians. So just because we can 3D print a house now doesn't mean every house that's been built up until now is going to disappear. So every house that's been built is going to need updating. It's going to need electrics, it's going to need plumbing, it's going to need water. Those skills are incredibly difficult to automate. So I think we're going to see a big movement back to traditional skills that a lot of people, particularly in the West, avoided because they didn't want to use their hands on a day-to-day basis. They wanted to go to university, they wanted to learn more intellectual-based subjects. But a lot of those are actually increasingly easy to automate. So I think we'll see a movement back, certainly my son, my youngest son, I'm recommending that he doesn't go into academia, that he actually moves into industry, because I think there's more of a future and more of a way to earn good money, doing actually things that we've moved away from, using that.
Okay. Another one from Aisha Chaudhary. She says, how can a small business owner from Pakistan begin to leverage disruptive AI technologies to ride this sixth wave? A difficult one for you to answer, I think.
I think it is difficult. I think you're absolutely right. The saviours, to some respects, is that a lot of these are being offered as services. So, for example, we take cloud computing, for example. Most small businesses can have access to cloud computing-based accountancy packages that previously were not available, and they can have access to this at a very small price point. So increasingly, these things will be offered as a service. But I think it's absolutely right. But the key, I think, for small businesses is this could be your opportunity here. As we increasingly see large companies use this automation to provide a very generalist service, you need to focus on differentiating through value. And what we're seeing in the UK, for example, is an upswell, particularly from the pandemic, in locally produced goods, local bakers, local farm shops that can offer something different. So the key, I think, is to try and use these automations as services to do away with the non-value adding activities that small businesses have to deal with, so that they can focus on making sure they offer value for doing something.
Are you there?
I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. What do people in the workforce need to learn, unlearn, and learn to stay relevant and updated in the future? Again, from Aisha Chaudhary.
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, a very good question. The album chocolate. So I think people, specifically those who've been in business for a long time, this is a very tough decision for a lot of people to make, which is everything that you've learned today. A lot of that effectively could be deemed not relevant in the moving forward. And actually, a lot of leaders are struggling with the concept of them not being the smartest person in the room, because the world has changed so quickly. So the biggest challenge, I think, is to approach each situation with a completely open mind, and not to think that the way we used to do things is necessarily the way we will do things moving forward. I took a slide out of the presentation because I had enough material already. I think the key was to understand what are the things that will not change. So understand the elements that won't change, and then understand the elements that necessarily will change. And the areas where things potentially will change, be prepared to accept that everything that you've learned today about that might not be correct anymore, and that you might have to start again, and understand that with an open mind. But understanding the things that won't change would be, for example, that people always want products that are low price, for example. Those sorts of constants will remain true. So the challenge is for people to understand what are the things that are taken to be true that are still true, and what are the things that are taken to be true that no longer are valid, and be willing to accept that maybe something you've spent 10, 15 years learning isn't relevant moving forward, and have the grace to basically accept that.
Right. The next one is from Imran Azam.
Hello, your
So he
hands
asks,
on camera, by the way.
if there's a hands-on, and I have been asking the gentleman to please unmute his mic, and probably he's not doing that. Can you see that? Can you ask him to unmute it? So Mr. Asif is asking a question. Can he unmute his mic, please? Anyway, in the meantime, you can take this question from Imran Azam. In a third world country like Pakistan, how would we be able to upgrade skills of our manpower? Are we foreseeing more job losses as the robots would take over majority of jobs in the global world?
Yeah, that's it. I have a whole chapter on this. Yeah. I think it is a worrying time for emerging nations, and I think they will be hit hardest by this, because there is going to be a large amount of technological unemployment in the West, but there is going to be harder, I think, for countries like Pakistan, India, China, where it has a large population. Maybe where a large percent of that population, maybe has very low levels of skills or education relevant to adapt in this new world, where the skill level is rising. So the amount of skills needed to compete in the sixth wave is going to be higher than it was in the fifth wave. And this is one of the interesting differences between this wave and every other wave. In the fifth wave, there was always a job where someone with very limited skills would go. So even though we used to work in the fields, and we went out of agriculture and we moved into factories, and in factories we went and worked in call centres and office jobs, there was always something that someone with very little skills could do. Answer the phone, or put things in a box, or whatever. Looking forwards, machines are going to do all of those sorts of jobs. But it's very hard to imagine what it is that someone who basically only has these trades is going to be able to do. And where you have a country where there is a vast young population of people with limited skills, I think it is going to be a very challenging time for them. specifically as Western companies start to reshore a lot of their manufacturing back to the West.
Salman is asking that there are certain essential and right decisions which we take against our feelings. How AI will feel for that particular type of decision? We cannot capture this in if, then, and else. A question related to feelings.
That's correct. That's correct. If we look at technologies like Era, who I'm talking with later today, they've been able to create technology that provides recommendations, and you can either accept those recommendations, or you can basically say, actually, I think I know better. I think I know better, because we've got human experience. What it's also able to do is it's basically able to track whether or not your intervention made things better or worse. So we're able now to be able to validate how accurate are these feelings. If I have feelings that are causing me to believe in something that the data is telling me is not correct, then for the first time ever we're starting to be able to validate whether those assumptions. But I think what this is moving to is it's moving us towards a world where we start to value our human nature and our human skills much more. So if we allow machines to do a lot of the repetitive, boring, what they call the dull, dangerous, and dirty jobs, it enables us to focus on how we can add value to each other, and to add more empathetic solutions, and to add more value to the wider world. So I think they're very much positives and negatives on it. But to go back to the point, we are now able, probably by the realm of data that we're collecting, to be able to see how accurate are those feelings, and are we making the right decisions.
This one is from our president of MAP, Mr. Amir Abbasi. Sean, he is asking, what is the expectation of time in which we are expected to achieve singularity? Difficult one.
The prediction is 2025. If you look at the people who are monitoring this most closely, and I'll defer to someone called Ray Kurzweil, who wrote the book The Singularity is Near, and I've been talking about thinking computers for a long time now. The prediction is kind of when this wave collapses, it could be around 2040 to 2045. The dangerous thing is that I think, and I normally have this in my presentation, but most people who are involved in this all agree that this is going to happen. We're going to reach a point of technological singularity. But everyone agrees they don't know what happens next.
Okay, then we have a question from Mr. Akil Ahmed. He's asking, is COVID-19 essentially taking world towards digital economy?
Yeah, very much so. It's been a massive accelerator on that move, specifically towards digital methods of shopping, digital methods of media consumption. It's got us accustomed to working remotely. So it has. It's not completely, but definitely it is accelerated progress.
Another one from this lady, Javeria Beg. I think she's from Institute of Business Management. Anyway, how should organizations plan their talent acquisition in the wake of sixth generation disruption?
I think this is a really important question, actually. And this is why I talked about mindsets before machines. We need to have a mindset in an organization that is future focused, not past focused. Because once you understand that, then you understand where the world is going, and we understand how technology is changing, not just our firm in the center of the universe, but actually our customers who should be in the center of the universe, then we can start to think about the skills that we will be moving forward. Those skills are the ones that I talked about earlier: critical thinking skills, critical analysis, things like data scientists are very important, statistical analysis skills, creativity skills. These are new types to the traditional sort of management skills that we used to require.
Sean, I have a difficult one from Faisal Saeed Khan. He's asking that it's really an amazing presentation. He's appreciating that. Living in AI world, Don't you think so that labor-intensive country like Pakistan would face resistance while adopting this kind of AI in Pakistan?
Yeah,
I
I
hope
think,
you can answer that question.
well, I'll try. I'll try. I think as I said, technology is a double-edged sword. It brings huge benefits, but it also brings has a disruptive side to it as well. For countries like Pakistan, some of the huge benefits are that you can access to technologies like the technology we're using right now to enable us to speak in real time. We've got access to the World Wide Web, which means that people, wherever they live in Pakistan, could educate themselves on pretty much any subject. But it also means that some things like, for example, poor infrastructure might affect the ability to use some of the technology. So, for example, if your road systems is, I remember the road system of Karachi being completely crazy. You know, I've looked at how people drive in Karachi, and I couldn't imagine a way a robot would be able to navigate that because of all of the motorcycles and the puppets and driving in and out people. How would a robot handle that? I don't know. I would struggle to imagine it. So I think there was great benefits for people in Pakistan to get access to knowledge and information that previously maybe their social status or their location would prevent. It is also an inhibitor to the adoption of some of these technologies as well through things like poor infrastructure, for example.
Right. Sean, I know that we are running short of time, but last few questions quickly. Zubair Ahmed from HBL, that is Habib Bank, is asking, how far will our education system needs to transform and how long will it take? How long will it take is difficult for you to answer
I think
because
that's
it's
very
in
difficult to do
Pakistan.
that. Yeah, I mean, I think it will have to happen quicker than you think. One of the things that we're seeing a big movement away from already in the West, and COVID has probably accelerated that. There has been a lot of the disruption that's taking place in the West has been because people have been going on to universities and have been, to some extent, exposed to ideologies that have made them not particularly useful moving forwards in their terms of subjects that they've studied, but actually quite angry. So they've been angry at sort of everything from systemic racism they believe exists to whatever, but actually they haven't got the skills needed. What we're seeing already is that two things are happening. One, this week, for example, both Australia and Japan, so they're redirecting funding away from some of the humanities degrees and towards more STEM degrees, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So they're moving towards investing heavily and supporting people who want to go into the subjects that they believe will be necessary moving forwards, and away from the ones that won't be. The other thing I think that we're seeing is this development of what we call the MOOCs, multiple online open courses. So this is the ability for people to access, and go through postgraduate or undergraduate degrees.
Rizwan is asking that in the aftermath of COVID, how would business recover the lost market share?
How will business recover the lost market share? I think
Recover market share.
I don't think some of them will. I think, for example, physical retail stores in a lot of cases will really struggle. Shopping malls are going to really struggle, simply because people have been accustomed to e-commerce, and some of what we call the laggards, people who, like my parents, for example, so people in their late 70s who would not normally buy things online, would normally physically go to shops. They're now so scared by COVID that they have been forced to use online shopping, and they've suddenly realised that that's much more convenient. So I think you're going to see a lot of retail stores specifically struggle to recover that economic value, struggle to survive. We've also plunged the world into a level of debt that has never before seen, and since 1971, when Richard Nixon moved the US dollar away from the gold standard, we now have fiat currencies that are detached from anything. So we have huge amounts of debt and a currency that isn't attached to anything. And I'm not sure that this debt is ever going to be repaid. I don't know how we reach the point where we're ever able to repay it. So there's some very big challenges for governments moving forwards, and I don't know how we move forward on that basis. In fact, I talk about the collapse of this wave in my book being because the debt bubble becomes unsustainable. The Ponzi scheme is effectively, the servicing of debt, remove debt, and collapse. I think there are some very big challenges, and I don't think these people who are running governments know how to resolve that. They know how to make short-term actions, but they don't understand the long-term implications of that.
Okay, we have 4 questions from Mr. Abdul Hamid Khan. First, what is the future of big shopping centers in the current pandemic?
Difficult.
And there is a general perception that working from home has added more pressure on employees. What do you think?
I think,
Obviously.
I've worked from home for a long time now. It has positives and it has negatives. The positives are that I don't have to spend 4 hours a day in a car commuting. The negatives are you never have a clear work and home life. Two tend to blend, and that can become quite stressful. And the other thing is as well, there is a big social side to working. The act of getting people together into a same location to have discussions and social interactions is part of being human. And I think there is a danger that as we move towards remote working, we will see an increase in people becoming more isolated and more depressed.
Okay, then I don't think there is any other question, except there are lots of thanks to you, Sean, for your discourse and for the interesting topics which you have. In fact, that's a food for thought for everyone. And I think the best would be for all of them to go through that book, read that. And by the way, luckily, I was the first one to grab that audio version.
Yes.
On that deal.
I realised my slide is out of date because it says audio is available next week and it's already available.
Yeah. The last one from me. Autonomous trucks won't these be possible where there is an infrastructure? So how soon do you think that the global infrastructure for developing such kind of autonomous trucks will be there?
In emerging nations or just globally?
Globally.
I think this is where I think countries that have very well-maintained infrastructure will be able to use these technologies like autonomous vehicles quite easily. Specific in I think the US and China and Australia specifically, because they're big countries with lots of straight roads and very linear and grid-like cities. In Europe, I think they'll be more difficult to adopt because the infrastructure was designed for horses, not for cars or roads, so it's going to be more difficult in European cities. For countries like Nigeria or other African countries, Pakistan, which has more congestion and less rules, if I can say that, if I can be over the people drive in and out a lot more. I really struggle to see how you will get autonomous vehicles in the short term, maybe long term, but not in the short term. But I can see how you will use things like drone technologies, for example, quite successfully. And what I think will happen is one of the other ways to keep things from outside city centres to inside city centres, and currently China's doing a lot of work on this, and the Amazon company doing it in the United States. There's something called tube logistics. So basically underground tunnels that move freight from an out of city fulfillment centre to more inner city, smaller inner city urban district centres. So I think one of the ways that will happen will be people will be digging down and building tunnels that move this freight simply because of the congestion and the falling on the surface.
Thank you, Sean. I think we did manage that 90 minutes time, which you very kindly agreed to give it to us. And thank you all the participants who were there with us, and we'll keep on informing you of all of an upcoming virtual program. It was a big I must say, for Sean to spare a time for 90 minutes according to the time zones which we have there is a big thing. So thank you, Sean. Thank you very much.